Hello, I'm Grace Trafton of The Better Part. I'm here today at beautiful Filoli, located 30 miles south of San Francisco. Filoli is one of the finest remaining country estates of the early 20th century. Stay tuned and hear about the history of this idyllic place and see some of its breathtaking views. Our guest today, Tom Davids, is a longtime resident of San Carlos, California, where he's a community leader, including having served on the city council for 12 years and 3 terms as mayor. Tom became involved with Filoli a few years ago as a docent, newsletter editor, and a member of the Speakers Bureau. Welcome, Tom. It's so good to see you here today.
Well, thank you, Grace. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us about the Filoli location and what makes this property so very special.
Well, Filoli is located 30 miles south of San Francisco on the peninsula. It is the last great estate remaining in California, and it's totally intact. The house is as it was when it was built, the gardens as they were when they were planted, and so forth. It's also unique in that it's a family house. 2 families lived here, and we'll talk about those as we go along. And so this is a very unique setting and a very unique property.
And the name Filoli is very unusual. What exactly does that mean, and where did the name come from?
Well, the name was designed by Mr. Bourne, and F-I-L-O-L-I stands for fight, F-I, love, L-O, and live, L-I. Mr. Bourne had a credo: fight for the just cause, love your fellow man, and live a good life. And that's how the name came to be.
Tell us something about William Bowers Bourne, the creator of Filoli.
Well, you have to go back in time to 1600. In 1629, Jared Bourne started the Bourne dynasty. He was a Puritan. He came over to Massachusetts with a group of 1,000 Puritans, and that's where it all started. About 180 years later, William Bourne I was born, and sometime after that, William Bourne II. So we're going to talk about William Bourne. We call him Will.
Mm-hmm.
And he was born in San Francisco. He was raised in San Francisco, and he took over his father's business when his father passed away. Interesting part of the story was that his father died of a gunshot wound.
Oh.
No one really knows how or why, but apparently he discharged his gun accidentally. They think it fell to the floor. They think it went off, and it killed him.
So it was actually an accident then?
It was an accident of some type, but he died alone, and Will found him actually looking for him.
That's kind of sad, isn't it?
It was, yes.
So how long did he own the property?
Well, Will bought the property in 1915, and he bought it because it was he bought actually 1,800 acres, and he purchased it because he was the president of Crystal Springs Reservoir, and this is the water supply for San Francisco. And so this 1,800 acres was part of the reservoir watershed. So he purchased on his own account 715 acres, which became the Filoli mansion area with the adjacent property. So it started in 1915.
And who was the next owner of Filoli, and what was their background?
The next owner was the Roth family. Mr. and Mrs. Roth were descendants and part of the Matson steamship line. Mrs. Roth actually was a daughter of Captain Roth. Mm. They purchased the property when the Bournes passed away in 1936. So in 1937, they took over it, and they had 3 children. 2 of them, 2 twins, girl twins, were in their teens, and their son was about 20 years old.
I see. And how long did they own the property, and who owns it now?
They owned it until Mr. Roth passed away in 1963, I believe. 1975, Mrs. Roth decided it was time to dispose of the property. A lot of people wanted to buy it. They wanted golf courses, they wanted houses. It was very prime property. And when all was said and done, she opted to donate it to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And they own it now.
Oh, great. Well, let's go back to the Bournes again. Bourne built a very, very large house at Filoli. And when was it built, and why did Bourne choose this particular site?
It was built, it started to be built in 1915, and it was built, completed by 1917. So this very large house, 36,000 square feet, went up very quickly. It'd be very difficult to imagine that happening today.
Right.
But in those days, you just hired a lot of carpenters and workmen, and things got done. So it was completed then, in 1917.
And were there any significant changes made to the property after it was built?
There were a number of changes after the property was completed and moved into. In 1918, the orchard was completed. The orchard was called the Gentleman's Orchard. It included about 8 acres. It had 1,000 trees plus vineyards. And so it was designed so that the family who lived there could easily access good fruit and vegetables and so forth. So that was 1918. In 1920, the greenhouse was completed. In 1926, the ballroom was completed. It was used until the ballroom was used after they moved into the house, but it wasn't completed in terms of the murals on the wall or the decorations around the fireplace and so forth. So that was done at that point. In 1929, a French colonial balcony was built on the house, and that balcony was designed to allow Mr. Bourne to get out of his room and to see his estate. Unfortunately, in 1921, he suffered a stroke at his gold mine in Empire in Grass Valley. And after that, he was somewhat incapacitated, more strokes later on, and it came to a point where he was basically in his room and couldn't really move beyond it. So they built this wonderful balcony so that he could actually roll out of his room and into the outside.
Now, there's 3 themes that convey the essence of Filoli. Can you tell us what they are?
Yeah, basically the essence of Filoli is history, in that it brings people back into the history of the early 1900s to this historic location. It's also about design, because the building had a number of different designs and different architectural flavors. There were the Georgian, the Stuart, the Mediterranean. There's some Spanish involved. So it's interesting to see the design factors come together. And then the third part, which is looking forward, is a preservation. So you got the history, design, and preservation. And bear in mind that this is the last remaining great estate in California, and now it's owned by the trust, and therefore it will continue to be available for people. So you can kind of summarize it by saying that Bourne created the property, Roth enhanced the property, and the National Trust ensures that it will be forever available to all those to enjoy.
Very good, because it's a lovely place to visit.
It is, yeah.
So Filoli is known for its beautiful gardens. What makes them so very special?
Filoli has 16 acres of formal garden. And this was a big part of the design when the house and the garden came together in its design stage. There's all sorts of design elements in the garden that reflect the English Renaissance gardens of the 17th and 18th century. It was laid out by Bruce Porter, who was a famous architect, and it was basically laid out on a north-south axis. When you look at it, you're looking at straight lines. The lines are crossed together with straight lines, and so you end up with what we call garden rooms. There's a garden room for the sunken garden, There's a garden room for a model of a cathedral window in Paris. There's a high point in the garden where you can actually see, or you could see when the property was built, all the way into Crystal Springs, which is a great viewpoint. And there's a Dutch garden, which has some beautiful trellis work. A knot garden, which is a model of the type of garden that came through the Roman time of occupying England. And it's a series of hedges that intertwine with one another. So it's a wonderful, wonderful location, and the one that most people look at and see when they first arrive is the sunken garden. A point here about how it's maintained. You'd think it would have a lot of people involved, and we do. They have some 14 or so full-time people, plus some student interns, and we have over 100 garden volunteers who come in and weed and plant and rotate and so forth.
So Filoli is really dependent on its volunteers.
Very much so. In fact, there's 1,300 total.
1,300.
These people who do the garden, people like myself who do the nature education, and folks who take tickets and so forth.
That's wonderful. We always need volunteers.
That's right. Very
so,
true.
Are the beautiful gardens in demand for weddings?
They are very high demand, but weddings are not allowed.
Oh, they're not allowed.
Filoli does not allow weddings because if we did, we would take over and it'd be all weddings. And so there are no weddings in Filoli. To our knowledge, there were only 2 weddings ever there, and they were both a daughter of Mrs. Roth, Lurleen. Mm-hmm. She had a wedding there. She had a reception there, rather. And her sister, Bernice, had a wedding and a reception there, and that was it.
That was it, huh? Were they great big weddings?
Big weddings, big weddings.
So hundreds of people.
Hundreds of people, lots of people.
Came and
they all had a good time.
Wonderful. So how was the open space beyond the house and garden used by the Bourne and Roth families?
Well, it's used for recreation. The trails were installed way back then, as were service roads, so you could ride the trails or hike the trails. Horses were very popular, especially with the Roth family, because Mrs. Roth was a world-known equestrian, and she had horses that she raised and she transported around the country and competed with. So horses were big. Toward the top of what we call the pond, there was a bocce area where they have bocce court, and so they would go up there, I presume, and enjoy a bocce game. I'm not sure whether the kids would swim in the pond, but there was a pond there. And it was basically a space where the wild space kind of flowed into the garden space, and it all became one grand feature.
So there aren't any more horses there now, is there?
No.
All the stables are gone?
The stables are gone. We have one stable that, one building we call Res Barn, and this was actually a barn for one of Mrs. Roth's stallions. His name was Red. And so we now use it for restrooms and also for an educational room.
Oh, I see. So can visitors to Filoli access the open space?
They really cannot, unless they're with a docent. So it's not just open for people walking around, but they sign up, they go on tours. Every Saturday we have a family tour into the open space. During the summer we do sunset tours.
Oh.
And it's a very nice time of the day to go and to see it in a different light, to see the different animals, and special events throughout the year. But you do need to sign up, and we take you in.
So
make sure you come back.
So we can see the open spaces, because I've never seen it myself.
You could go, just make sure you go with a docent, and you're all set.
Are there large groups or small groups?
Well, the groups are typically about 10 or so. Depends on what we're trying to do, but in a general nature walks, about 10 to a docent, and then there's plenty of time to talk and get to know the property.
And this is like a sunset type of tour?
the sunset tour, we're doing that now. And you go out at 6:30 or 6 o'clock, and you come back at 8.
Oh, I see.
And
Great.
during that time, you see the sun's going down, the shadows are coming along, and it's a beautiful time.
I bet you can get some beautiful photographs
Oh,
during
you
that
can.
time.
Yeah, very much so.
That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the most popular tours that you have there?
Well, we do nature tours with youngsters, with school kids. Each year we put about 5,000 school kids into the program.
Oh,
They arrive with their class, we break them up into small groups, and the docents take them out. That's a very, very popular with the schools and with the kids. We have tours that go out and study specific things like newts. We have a lot of newts in our pond,
oh, really?
so that's an interesting discussion. People also enjoy talking about the cemetery and finding out the history of the cemetery. And so that's on many of our walks. And then just the nature you come to as you go here and there. We have 7 miles of trails, and so there's plenty of plenty of property to cover if you do the whole tour. You can't really do it in 2 hours, which is the limit for most of our tours. So we pick and choose based on what people are interested in.
So these are all walking tours, is that right?
They're all walking tours.
So no bicycles or?
No bicycles. We can accommodate folks with special needs.
Oh, okay.
But we pick the areas where we take them, and they're typically handicapped accessible and primarily with wheelchairs, motorized chairs.
Great. So take us on a hike to some of the features beyond the garden wall.
Okay. We have a number of areas that we kind of like to concentrate on. One is the pasture. The pasture runs off of the house, and the pasture was used by Mrs. Roth to pasture her horses. She also used it for growing feed, and some of that feed was removed and went to her other property, which is the Wyworry Farm in Woodside. That's where she had most of her horses, and that's where they were stabled and trained. And so the pasture was very important for the family. Passage through the property is an interesting story. When Mr. Roth bought the property, he bought it, and coming right through the middle of it was Old Kenyatta Road. And Old Kenyatta Road was a primary way to go north and south in those days. And Mr. Roth, when he noticed that or realized what he had going through his property, decided to move Kenyatta Road. So Kenyatta Road now is where it is, and the property that you see in the slide is the road itself, the Old Kenyatta Road, and this is now a hiking place.
Looks like a really nice place to
Yeah,
hike.
yeah. This is also called Madrone Alley because the madrones arching over the trees, over the road, and making their way to the end of the property.
But people can't really hike there by themselves, right? They need a
They need a
docent
That's correct.
with them.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit more about the cemetery.
Cemetery was one of the later improvements by the Bourne family. It was developed in 1929. It so happened that their daughter Maud had married Arthur Vincent, who was an Irish nobleman, and so she spent a lot of time in Ireland, but she came back and forth frequently. And she was on a ship coming home from Ireland, and she got pneumonia. And she got to New York City, and she passed away.
How old was she?
And she was, let's see, she was probably around 40, as I recall.
Oh, okay.
She had two small children with her, plus a caretaker.
Mm-hmm.
So everything was covered all right, but now we have Maud who needs a place to rest, and there was no place for her. And so Mrs. Bourne decided that they needed a cemetery in Filoli. And so they designated 5 acres of land on a knoll with a clear view in those days of the Crystal Springs area, reservoir. And the place was prepared in a short period of time, and as soon as she arrived from the East Coast, They had the funeral, the burial, and the burial was in the cemetery. After that, a short time after that, Mrs. Bourne decided to bury their young son, their first boy, but that died shortly after birth.
Oh.
And he was buried in San Francisco. So a decision was made to remove his body from the vault and bring it to the burial ground as well.
Oh, I see.
So following that, Mrs. Bourne was buried, then Mr. Bourne. They both died in 1936.
Uh-huh.
And then Maud, of course, was already buried. She was the first one.
Uh-huh.
Her daughter was buried sometime after that. And most recently, in 2011, Sandra, the great-granddaughter of Mrs. Bourne, is buried there.
Oh.
So this is the burial ground is still owned by the Bourne family, and they're entitled to use it, and it remains with them. So the trust has all the other property, but the grave site is owned by the Bournes.
So they still own that
cemetery
property.
Uh-huh.
And no one else is buried there besides
No.
Bourne family.
Just the
is
Bourne
that right?
family, correct.
And what experiences have you had as a docent? Now, you've been with Filoli, you've been volunteering for over 5 years, is that right?
Yeah.
So tell me some of your experiences.
Well, I think the fun part of the job is to take the kids out and older folks as well, but especially the kids, because many of them haven't been in the open space before. They're not familiar with the animals, so we do our best to find wild turkey and deer, and of course banana slugs are always important. We look for them, but turn over the rocks and the logs and see what we can find for the kids. We take them on their hikes about an hour and a half to 2 hours long.
For the kids.
And so they get a nice view of everything going on there, and that's really an enjoyable part of the volunteering that I do.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yes.
So what are some of the kids' most favorite spots?
Well, they all like the animals. You know, we talked about the gophers. We keep looking for gophers, but they're very elusive. We see a lot of little mounds, but we hardly ever see a gopher. Every now and then we'll see a snake. They'll always be looking for animals, and because of their age, they're not too interested in the growth of flowers or the beauty of flowers so much. They're more into the ground and into the animals, and that's what they enjoy the most, I believe.
So do you see very many animals on each of your docent trips?
We usually see deer. Deer there are very prevalent. Wild turkeys are also common. And then banana slugs, if you look hard enough, you'll find one somewhere. And during the winter season, you'll find a lot of them. And then the newts as well. The newts are traveling around toward the end of the year when they go to the breeding place. And so they're also quite common.
Thank you, Tom, for giving us a tour of this really lovely place. Let's end our program by looking at some more images of Filoli. I hope you've enjoyed our program today, and I hope you have a chance to come visit Filoli in the very near future. And please be sure to watch our programs on YouTube. See you again next week on The Better Part. Bye-bye.